Behind the holy robes and biblical grandeur of this 1953 epic lies a treasure trove of bizarre Hollywood secrets that would make any Roman emperor blush. From gunpoint threats between co-stars to an assistant director who literally couldn't eat lunch as Jesus, and a movie poster featuring the wrong actress entirely, this groundbreaking CinemaScope spectacle was stranger than fiction. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Robe. Fact 1. The opening scene was stolen from its sequel. Here's something that will blow your mind about the Robe. The very first scene you see after the opening credits wasn't actually filmed for the Robe at all. Instead, it was lifted directly from the sequel, Demetrius and the Gladiators, which hadn't even been released yet when the Robe hit theaters in 1953. The scene shows Emperor Caligula presiding over a ceremony before gladiatorial games, but if you look closely, you'll spot actors who don't appear anywhere else in the Robe. There's J. Robinson as the Mad Emperor Caligula, which makes sense since he was in both films, but standing in the arena are William Marshall as a gladiator named Glycon, Victor Mature as Demetrius, positioned directly behind him, and Ernest Borgnine as Strabo leading a gladiatorial procession. The problem is that Marshall and Borgnine weren't cast in the Robe at all, they only appeared in the sequel. This bizarre movie magic happened because 20th Century Fox was so confident that the Robe would be a massive hit that they put Demetrius and the Gladiators into production before the Robe was even released to the public. The break between filming the two movies was only about 3 weeks, according to J. Robinson himself, which explains how the footage got mixed up so easily. The studio essentially used this opening scene as a teaser for the sequel that audiences didn't even know was coming. It's like watching a trailer embedded right into the main feature, except nobody told the audience that's what they were seeing. The red robe curtain parts dramatically to reveal this grand spectacle, and viewers assumed they were watching Richard Burton's story unfold, when in reality they were getting a sneak peek at Victor Mature's upcoming adventure as a gladiator. This cinematic sleight of hand went completely unnoticed by audiences and critics for decades, making it one of the most successful instances of recycled footage in movie history. Fact 2. Jesus had to eat lunch alone. When director Henry Koster needed someone to play Jesus in the Robe, he made an unusual choice that led to one of Hollywood's most bizarre dining restrictions. Instead of casting a professional actor, Koster selected his own second assistant director, Donald C. Clune, to portray the Son of God, even though Jesus' face would never actually be shown in the finished film. This casting decision created an unexpected problem that reveals just how seriously 20th Century Fox took the religious subject matter of their epic biblical film. The studio executives decided that it would be completely inappropriate for someone dressed as Jesus Christ to eat meals in the Fox commissary alongside regular cast and crew members. They worried that the sight of Jesus casually dining with Roman soldiers and other actors might somehow diminish the sacred nature of the character or create an uncomfortable atmosphere for the production. As a result, poor Donald Clune was banished to eat every single meal alone in his dressing room while wearing his full Jesus costume and makeup. This meant that during lunch breaks, while everyone else gathered in the bustling commissary to socialize and discuss the day's filming, Clune sat by himself, still in character, as the most famous figure in Christian history. The situation became even more absurd when you consider Clune's other responsibilities during filming. Since he was still working as the second assistant director, he had to handle all the regular paperwork and administrative duties that came with his job, including signing vouchers for all the extras and finishing various production documents. He would complete all of this official business while still wearing his Jesus robes and makeup, creating the surreal image of Christ himself, managing the practical details of a major Hollywood production. This studio policy remained in effect throughout the entire filming process, making Clune's experience as Jesus both spiritually significant and surprisingly lonely. Fact 3. Burton was threatened at gunpoint by Stuart Granger. The production of The Robe became the setting for one of Hollywood's most dangerous love triangles when Richard Burton found himself staring down the barrel of a gun held by fellow actor Stuart Granger. The weapon wasn't a movie prop, and this wasn't a scene from the film, it was real life. And Granger was deadly serious about protecting his marriage. The drama began when Burton, who was playing the lead role of Roman tribune Marcellus Gallio, started having an affair with his co-star Gene Simmons during filming in 1953. Simmons, who portrayed Diana in the movie, was married to Stuart Granger at the time, and Granger was not the type of man to ignore his wife's infidelity quietly. Known for his swashbuckling roles and fiery temperament, Granger had built a reputation both on and off screen as someone you didn't want to cross. When Granger discovered what was happening between his wife and Burton, he decided to handle the situation in the most direct way possible. He confronted Burton with a loaded gun, making it crystal clear that the affair needed to end immediately if Burton wanted to continue breathing. The threat was serious enough that Burton took it as a genuine warning about his personal safety, not just an angry husband's empty bluster. What makes this incident even more remarkable is that Burton and Simmons had to continue working together professionally, appearing in romantic scenes as their characters fell in love on screen, all while navigating the very real danger that Granger posed behind the scenes. Despite the gun incident, their relationship continued, and the two would eventually divorce their respective spouses and marry each other in 1957, proving that even death threats couldn't stop this particular Hollywood romance from reaching its dramatic conclusion. Fact 4. The movie poster shows the wrong Jean. If you look at the original movie poster for The Robe, you'll notice something that doesn't quite match up with the actual film, and it's all because of a casting change that happened too late in the production process. The poster shows a woman's face positioned between the likenesses of Richard Burton and Victor Mature. But that face doesn't belong to Jean Simmons, who actually played Diana in the finished movie. The mix-up started when 20th Century Fox originally cast Jean Peters, a popular actress of the 1950s, to play the female lead role of Diana. Peters had already appeared in several Fox productions and seemed like a natural choice for the part of the Roman senator's daughter who becomes Burton's love interest. The studio's art department went ahead and created promotional materials, including the main theatrical poster, featuring Peters' image alongside the male stars. However, life had other plans for the production when Peters discovered she was pregnant. In the 1950s, pregnancy typically meant an immediate end to filming for actresses, as studios were not equipped to work around expecting mothers the way they sometimes do today. Peters had to withdraw from the project, leaving Fox scrambling to find a replacement who could step into the role without delaying the already ambitious production schedule. Jean Simmons was brought in to replace Peters, and she proved to be an excellent choice who brought both talent and beauty to the role of Diana. But here's where things get interesting from a marketing perspective. The movie posters had already been designed, printed, and distributed to theaters across the country. Rather than go through the expensive process of redesigning and reprinting all the promotional materials, Fox decided to simply leave Peters' face on the poster, creating a permanent record of the casting change that never happened. This means that moviegoers saw Jean Peters advertising a movie she never actually appeared in. Fact 5. Burton smoked 100 cigarettes daily during filming. Richard Burton's smoking habit during the production of The Robe reached truly staggering levels that would shock even the heaviest smokers of today. Throughout the entire filming process in 1953, Burton consumed exactly 100 cigarettes every single day, which equals 5 full packs of 20 cigarettes each, creating a constant cloud of smoke around the actor who was supposed to be portraying a man undergoing a profound spiritual transformation. This extraordinary consumption meant that Burton was lighting up a new cigarette roughly every 10 minutes during his waking hours, assuming he slept for about 8 hours each night. The habit was so ingrained that he would smoke between takes, during costume fittings, while reviewing scripts, and even during breaks in filming the most sacred scenes of the movie. Cast and crew members recalled seeing Burton constantly with a cigarette in hand, creating an almost surreal contrast between his chain-smoking reality and his character's journey toward Christian enlightenment. The irony of Burton's smoking becomes even more pronounced when you consider that his character, Marcellus Gallio, undergoes a complete moral and spiritual awakening after touching the robe of Jesus Christ. While Burton was delivering lines about redemption, purity, and finding peace through faith, he was simultaneously feeding one of the most destructive addictions known to human health. The man who was supposed to represent the transformative power of divine grace was actually slowly poisoning himself with tobacco throughout the entire production. This level of smoking was considered heavy even by 1950 standards, when cigarettes were much more socially acceptable and their health risks were not widely understood by the general public. Burton's 5-pack-a-day habit during The Robe was just the beginning of a lifelong struggle with tobacco that would eventually contribute to serious health problems later in his career, making his portrayal of spiritual redemption all the more poignant in hindsight. Fact 6. 2 identical movies were shot simultaneously. The Robe holds the unique distinction of being essentially 2 different movies that were filmed at exactly the same time, creating one of the most ambitious and expensive production challenges in Hollywood history. When 20th Century Fox decided to make The Robe the first film released in their revolutionary CinemaScope widescreen format, they faced a major problem. Most movie theaters across America were not equipped with the special projection equipment needed to show the new ultra-wide format. Rather than risk losing millions of potential ticket sales, Fox made the extraordinary decision to film every single scene in the movie twice. The first version used the new CinemaScope anamorphic lenses that squeezed a wide image onto standard film, while the second version was shot with regular cameras in the traditional aspect ratio that existing theaters could handle. This meant that Richard Burton, Gene Simmons, Victor Mature, and the entire cast had to perform each scene back-to-back, first for the widescreen version and then immediately again for the standard version. The two versions weren't simply the same footage cropped differently, they were genuinely separate productions with different camera setups, staging, and even variations in dialogue delivery. The actors had to adjust their performances for each format, since the wider CinemaScope frame required different blocking and positioning compared to the standard format. Directors and cinematographers had to completely rethink how to compose shots for each version, making sure that both looked natural and cinematic despite their vastly different proportions. This dual production process essentially doubled the filming time and costs for what was already one of the most expensive movies ever made at that point. The standard version was sent to theaters that couldn't show CinemaScope, while the widescreen version played in specially equipped venues, giving audiences two genuinely different viewing experiences of the same story, depending on which theater they chose to visit. Fact 7. The sequels started before anyone knew if the movie would work. 20th Century Fox displayed an almost reckless level of confidence in The Robe by putting its sequel, Demetrius and the Gladiators, into full production before they had any idea whether audiences would embrace the original film or the revolutionary CinemaScope technology. This decision represented one of the biggest gambles in Hollywood history, as the studio was essentially betting millions of dollars on an untested format and a biblical epic that might have flopped completely. The studio began filming Demetrius and the Gladiators in the summer of 1953, completing the entire production by September of that year, even though The Robe wouldn't premiere until September 16, 1953. This meant that Fox was simultaneously producing a sequel to a movie that audiences had never seen, using a widescreen technology that had never been tested in commercial theaters, and banking on characters that moviegoers might reject entirely. The risk was enormous because CinemaScope was completely unproven as a commercial format. Movie theaters across the country would need to invest in expensive new projection equipment to show the widescreen films, and there was no guarantee that audiences would find the stretched-out format appealing rather than distracting or uncomfortable. If The Robe had failed at the box office, Fox would have been stuck with a completed sequel that nobody wanted to see, shot in a format that theaters might refuse to support. Victor Mature, who played Demetrius in both films, signed his contract in December 1952 specifically to appear in both the original movie and its sequel, meaning the studio had committed to the follow-up film before they had even finished shooting The Robe. This back-to-back production schedule created the unusual situation where the sequel was essentially completed before anyone knew whether the original story would resonate with audiences, making it one of the most confident bets in entertainment history. Fact 8. Burton hated the film so much, he said it made him throw up. Richard Burton's relationship with The Robe was one of the most contradictory in Hollywood history, as the film simultaneously launched his movie career and filled him with such disgust that he publicly trashed it for years afterward. Despite the movie becoming a massive box office success and earning Burton his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, he described the experience in terms that were both brutal and unforgettable. Burton later said that the film made him want to throw up and called it lousy but an almighty hit. He was particularly harsh about his own performance, describing himself as being dull as ditch water and an almighty flop. Even though critics and audiences generally praised his portrayal of the tormented Roman tribune Marcellus Gallio, the actor was genuinely amazed when he received the Oscar nomination, since he felt that critics had almost universally described his performance as wooden and lifeless. His hatred for the project was so intense that when 20th Century Fox studio chief Darryl F. Zanuck offered him a lucrative long-term contract based on the success of The Robe, Burton turned it down flat. This decision was made even more remarkable by the fact that Burton had engaged in a ferocious argument with Zanuck before the film's release, creating additional tension between the actor and the studio that had just made him a star. Burton's rejection of the Fox contract meant walking away from guaranteed financial security and steady work in favor of returning to London's West End theatre district, where he felt more artistically fulfilled. The irony of the situation was not lost on Burton himself, who recognized that while The Robe had made him internationally famous and opened doors throughout Hollywood, it had also represented everything he disliked about big-budget filmmaking and commercial entertainment over serious dramatic art. Fact 9. The CinemaScope lenses created the mumps. The revolutionary CinemaScope technology that made The Robe famous also created one of the most embarrassing technical problems in movie history, forcing directors to completely abandon close-up shots because the anamorphic lenses made every actor look like they were suffering from a severe case of the mumps. This bizarre distortion effect earned its nickname from the way the stretched and warped facial features resembled the swollen cheeks that come with the viral infection. The problem occurred because the early CinemaScope lenses used a fixed anamorphic element that created the widescreen effect by squeezing a much wider image onto standard 35mm film. When objects or people moved closer to the camera, this squeezing effect became increasingly pronounced, stretching faces horizontally in a way that made cheeks appear unnaturally puffy and bloated. The closer an actor got to the lens, the more distorted and grotesque their appearance became, turning what should have been intimate romantic moments into unintentionally comedic disasters. Director Henry Koster and cinematographer Leon Shamroy had to completely rethink their approach to filming The Robe, avoiding the close-ups and medium shots that were standard tools of cinematic storytelling. Instead, they composed scenes using primarily wide shots that kept the actors at a safe distance from the camera, where the distortion was less noticeable. This limitation meant that viewers missed out on the subtle facial expressions and emotional nuances that close-ups typically provide, making the performances feel more distant and theatrical. The technical crew struggled with additional focusing problems, as the anamorphic lenses had to be focused separately and frequently were not in focus at the same time, requiring multiple retakes of scenes that should have been simple to capture. Eventually, a mechanical system was developed to automatically focus the lenses, but not before The Robe had to work around these limitations throughout its entire production, creating a visual style that was as much about technical necessity as artistic choice. Fact 10. Radio City Music Hall rejected the film. The Robe was originally scheduled to have its world premiere at Radio City Music Hall, the most prestigious movie venue in New York City, but the famous theater delivered a shocking rejection that forced 20th Century Fox to scramble for an alternative location. Radio City Music Hall's management made it clear that they would not drop their elaborate stage show to accommodate the Robe's planned theatrical run, creating an embarrassing setback for what was supposed to be the most important film premiere of 1953. Radio City Music Hall had built its reputation on presenting a unique combination of first-run movies paired with spectacular live stage productions featuring the famous Rockettes dance troupe and elaborate musical numbers. The theater's management considered their stage shows to be just as important as the films they screened, and they were unwilling to sacrifice this signature programming format even for a groundbreaking epic like The Robe that promised to revolutionize the movie industry with its new CinemaScope technology. This rejection forced Fox to quickly relocate the world premiere to the Roxy Theater, which was located nearby at 153 West 50th Street. The Roxy, ironically, had recently suspended its own live stage shows and was more willing to accommodate the studio's needs for showcasing their new widescreen format. The premiere took place at the Roxy on September 16, 1953, followed by the public opening the next day at the same venue. The situation highlighted an interesting conflict between old and new forms of entertainment, as Radio City Music Hall's commitment to live theatrical performances clashed with Hollywood's push toward technological innovation. While The Robe went on to become a massive success at the Roxy and helped establish CinemaScope as the new standard for epic filmmaking, Radio City Music Hall's decision showed that even the most important movie palaces were not automatically willing to abandon their traditional programming for the sake of cinematic progress. Fact 11. A composer quit the Academy over the music snub. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences faced one of its most dramatic resignations in history, when distinguished composer Franz Waxman quit the organization in protest over their treatment of Alfred Newman's score for The Robe. Waxman, who had already won Academy Awards for his work on Sunset Boulevard and A Place in the Sun, was so outraged by the Academy's decision that he felt he could no longer be associated with an organization that would ignore such exceptional musical achievement. Alfred Newman's score for The Robe was widely considered a masterpiece by film historians and music critics, who praised its reverent, intense orchestration that perfectly complemented the epic's religious themes and the revolutionary CinemaScope format. Newman had brilliantly coordinated his music with the new widescreen technology and multi-channel stereophonic sound, creating thunderously ominous brass chords accompanied by wordless choirs that enhanced the film's spiritual impact from the very first scene. The snub became even more insulting when Newman did win an Oscar that same year, but for his work as musical director on the much lighter Irving Berlin and Ethel Merman musical Call Me Madam, rather than for his profound and moving contribution to The Robe. This ironic twist highlighted what many in the industry saw as the Academy's failure to recognize serious dramatic scoring in favor of more commercially appealing musical adaptations. Waxman's resignation sent shockwaves through Hollywood's music community and demonstrated just how seriously professional composers took the recognition of their craft. To show his continued respect for Newman's work on The Robe, Waxman later insisted that when he composed the score for the sequel Demetrius and the Gladiators, his screen credit should specifically note that his music was based on Newman's original score, ensuring that Newman would receive proper acknowledgement for creating the musical foundation that defined both films. Fact 12. Jesus' paperwork was signed by Jesus. One of the most surreal aspects of The Robe's production involved Donald Clune managing the mundane administrative tasks of Hollywood filmmaking while dressed as the most sacred figure in Christianity. Since Clune continued working as the second assistant director even while portraying Jesus, he found himself in the bizarre position of handling routine production paperwork while wearing his complete Jesus costume, including the flowing robes, sandals, and carefully applied makeup that transformed him into the Son of God. The daily requirements of his assistant director job meant that Clune had to sign payment vouchers for all the extras who appeared in the film's massive crowd scenes, approve various production expenses, and complete the endless paperwork that keeps a major Hollywood production running smoothly. This created the extraordinary sight of Jesus Christ himself sitting at a desk, carefully reviewing financial documents and signing his approval on expense reports with a fountain pen while dressed in first-century Palestinian garments. The situation became even more absurd when Clune had to coordinate with other department heads about scheduling, equipment needs, and logistical concerns for upcoming scenes. Imagine the confusion of new crew members who might encounter Clune in full Jesus regalia discussing camera angles, lighting requirements, or catering arrangements in completely modern business language. The contrast between his sacred appearance and his very practical Hollywood responsibilities created a constant source of unintentional comedy on the set. This dual role meant that official 20th Century Fox production documents from The Robe bear the signature of someone who was literally dressed as Jesus Christ at the time of signing. The legal and financial paperwork that documented one of the most expensive religious epics ever made was being processed and approved by an actor who was simultaneously embodying the central figure of the Christian faith, creating a uniquely Hollywood blend of the sacred and the commercial that perfectly captured the contradictions of biblical filmmaking. Fact 13. The film used defective color stock. The Robe became an unwitting test case for experimental film technology when 20th Century Fox decided to shoot their groundbreaking epic on a new type of Eastman color negative stock that turned out to be so problematic it nearly sabotaged the entire production. This experimental film stock was supposed to work better with the new CinemaScope format and provide richer, more vibrant colors for the biblical epic. But instead, it created technical nightmares that plagued the cinematography team throughout filming. The problems with the Eastman color stock became apparent almost immediately during production, as the film proved difficult to light properly and created inconsistent color reproduction that made it nearly impossible to achieve the rich, saturated look that director Henry Koster and cinematographer Leon Shamroy wanted for their religious spectacle. The stock was particularly troublesome when it came time to create multiple positive prints for distribution to theaters, as the color quality varied dramatically from print to print, meaning that audiences in different cities might see significantly different versions of the same scenes. According to reports from Variety in August 1953, The Robe and several other early Fox CinemaScope productions suffered from these technical limitations, forcing the studio to acknowledge that their experimental approach had backfired. The film stock was so unsatisfactory that Fox quickly abandoned it in favor of a new Eastman tungsten balanced stock for all subsequent productions, which proved much easier to work with during both filming and the printing process. Ironically, while the Robe's on-screen credits proudly state color by Technicolor, the actual color processing was handled entirely by Eastman Color, with Technicolor only providing the processing services rather than their famous 3-strip color system. This means that the first CinemaScope film, which was supposed to showcase the future of movie-making technology, was actually hampered by inferior color reproduction that made it less visually impressive than it should have been, creating a lasting reminder of the risks involved in pioneering new filmmaking techniques. Fact 14. Sets were recycled from a 1936 film. The village of Cana, where Marcellus meets the Apostle Peter in one of the Robe's most important spiritual scenes, was actually built 17 years earlier for a completely different movie set in North Africa. The sets had originally been constructed for the 1936 film Algiers and had been sitting unused on the 20th Century Fox backlot ever since, weathering through nearly 2 decades of California sun, rain, and neglect before being given new life as a biblical location. When production designer Lyle Wheeler and his team were tasked with creating the Palestinian village where Jesus had performed his first miracle of turning water into wine, they discovered that the existing Algiers sets could be perfectly repurposed with some creative redressing and strategic modifications. The Mediterranean architecture and desert-like appearance of the old sets made them ideal for representing the ancient Middle Eastern setting that the story required, saving the studio both time and money during the expensive production. The transformation from North African colonial setting to first-century Palestinian village involved adding period-appropriate details like ancient pottery, biblical-era clothing hanging from lines, and religious symbols that would help establish the Christian context of the scenes. The well with old broken columns that appears prominently in the Cana sequences became a recognizable landmark that helped tie the location to its historical and religious significance in the story. The recycled sets proved so successful that they were used again when Fox produced the sequel Demetrius and the Gladiators in the following year. This time, the same structures were redressed once more to represent the Christian neighborhood in Rome, where Demetrius lives at the beginning of that film, making it possibly the most versatile set in Hollywood history. Sharp-eyed viewers can still recognize the distinctive well and architectural features that appear in both films, creating an unintentional visual connection between the two biblical epics. Fact 15. ABC paid a record $2 million for 4 TV airings. ABC Television made television history when they paid an unprecedented $2 million for the rights to broadcast The Robe just 4 times on American television, setting a record that demonstrated how valuable major Hollywood films had become for network programming. This enormous payment was especially remarkable considering that most movies of the 1950s were sold to television for a fraction of that amount, making The Robe one of the most expensive single-film acquisitions in the early days of television broadcasting. The network's investment paid off spectacularly when The Robe premiered on television on Sunday, March 26, 1967, which was Easter Sunday. ABC scheduled the broadcast at the relatively early hour of 7 o'clock in the evening Eastern Standard Time specifically to allow for family viewing of the religious epic during the holiest weekend of the Christian calendar. The timing proved perfect as families gathered around their television sets to watch Richard Burton's spiritual journey unfold in their living rooms. What made the broadcast even more special was ABC's decision to air The Robe with only one commercial break during the entire 2-hour-plus running time, a luxury that was almost unheard of in television programming of that era. This minimal commercial interruption was not even granted to the annual telecasts of beloved classics like The Wizard of Oz, which typically featured multiple advertising breaks that disrupted the viewing experience. The single commercial break allowed viewers to experience The Robe almost as if they were watching it in a movie theater. The broadcast attracted an enormous audience of 60 million viewers, earning a Nielsen rating of 31.0 and capturing 53% of the total television audience that evening. This massive viewership made it the second largest TV audience for a film at that time, trailing only The Bridge on the River Kwai, and proved that biblical epics could draw huge television audiences when presented with the proper respect and minimal commercial interference.